Alright, I did a video a while back on the different zeros that you might come up with when zeroing your rifle from the prone compared to zeroing your rifle from the bench. And in that video we talked about why you might get two separate zeros, and largely it's because the fact that when you're shooting from the prone you have the tendency and the ability to load your bipod, whereas shooting from a bench, especially a bench like this where there's nothing to load your bipod against, it changes a lot of typically your barrel harmonics as well as some other things that we'll talk about here in a second. Now I've actually set my bench up to give me the ability to load my bipod. I've got a couple of screws here, and I've actually made a bracket that slides over these screws, as well as a couple of spacers that give me the ability to space my point to load my bipod off of however far out I need, so that I can just load my bipod when shooting from the bench as well. But a lot of public ranges that you'll come across do not have that, and there's nothing to load your bipod on. So we talked about in that original video, the two different zeros video, about how when you load your bipod, you're doing a couple different things. One, you're putting forward pressure on the rifle, which in turn is putting pressure on your recoil lug, which is slightly changing your barrel harmonics. And there's a couple other factors, or one other factor, that really will change where your group lines up as well. But another thing that can happen is if you inconsistently load your bipod, you can really mess up your groups. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So just a little bit ago, I shot two separate groups. I shot one with a very inconsistent bipod load. The first shot I shot with absolutely no load on the bipod. We did all these from the prone. Now, me trying to not load the bipod is very difficult, but I did my best to not load the bipod at all for the first shot. Second shot, I did the normal way I would shoot a shot, loading the bipod the way I always do. And then the third shot, I overloaded the bipod. I muscled my body into it and put way too much load on that bipod. And we'll look at the group size that we got there compared to the second 3-shot group that I shot. All this is at 100 yards, my personal 100-yard range here. The second 3-shot group that I shot, when I consistently loaded the bipod the way that I always load my bipod when I'm shooting from the prone, which I've become very accustomed to, so that I have got a very consistent load on my bipod. So let's go look at these two groups and we'll come back and talk about them.
Okay, so first shot, no load on the bipod. We'll go top right. Second shot, my normal amount of load. And now I'm going to overload. Okay, so I know it's kind of hard to make out, but there's vertical stringing in there. Even though that's a half MOA group, that is vertical stringing. Okay, so that was an even amount, the normal amount I load the bipod. One hole.
All right, so there you see there's definitely a difference in those two groups. The one where I did not consistently load my bipod, where I made it a point to inconsistently load my bipod, that group size ended up at a 0.495 inches, which is not a terrible group, but it's not something I'm happy with, and especially it's definitely not what this rifle is capable of if I'm doing my part and doing everything right to get all the accuracy I can out of the rifle. As you saw, the first shot where I didn't load my bipod went higher than any of the other ones. Now, there is a small bit of vertical stringing in this that you might notice. And that is where the group opens up, is in the vertical. Now, the first shot where I did not load my bipod at all, you'll see that there's a lot more pushback, a lot more recoil coming from this rifle. That's because there's no forward pressure. And when that recoil comes back, it's not going to come straight back because the rifle has not been loaded forward, giving the rifle something to rock on and give us that perfectly forward and back motion that we're looking for. So because of that, it's going to recoil significantly more, and as also, if you'll notice, the rifle comes up. Obviously not that drastically, but the muzzle actually rises more than any of the other shots, and that's because we don't have the ability when we're not loading the bipod to rock forward and backwards perfectly on our bipod. So that is why that first shot went higher than the rest of them. The second shot, you'll notice I did the way I always load my bipod, a very consistent load that I have, and it went right to the middle of my point of aim as far as elevation goes. Now, it wasn't a great winded shot, but that's neither here nor there. And then the third shot, you'll see I overloaded the bipod, and that shot happened to go lower than any of the rest of them. We were putting way more pressure on the barrel lug, as well as we were taking almost all movement, all recoil out of this rifle, which was in turn not allowing the rifle to move as much as it normally would, and giving us absolutely no muzzle rise. So we're changing the barrel harmonics and taking all of the muzzle rise out of it. But you may say, well, if that's the case, then why don't we overload our bipod every time? That would be great if you could do that consistently, but it's very hard to load your bipod as hard as you can and do that very consistently. Whereas if you set yourself up to do a nice consistent load on your bipod every time, you'll have a much more consistent group size. So the 3 shots that we shot where we loaded the bipod very consistently. Now, I also will say, you guys may notice, you may say, well, all 3 of those shots went to the top of the point of aim. Well, I was actually aiming at the top of this. When I broke the first shot, I noticed that I broke the shot right at the top of the circle, so I just kept that point of aim throughout the other 2 shots. So that's why this group actually was higher than any of the shots on these 3 shots. But that was actually my point of aim, and you'll notice that I was very consistent in my bipod load. This group turned out to be a 0.156 inch group, so well under quarter MOA. Obviously, it's just a 3-shot group, but you can see how consistent the rifle is shooting in comparison to the inconsistency that we have from this rifle. Now, this is just a 6mm Creedmoor. I actually just finished up rebarreling my 7 SAUM. I'm really excited about that. You guys will be seeing some 7 SAUM videos as well as some ELR videos coming up soon, as long as the weather permits. They're starting to clear out the fields. I just rebarreled the 7 SAUM with a full 30-inch barrel, so very excited about that. But that's not what this video is about. But what I wanted to say here is, this just being a 6mm Creedmoor, there's not a whole lot of recoil. So where there is not a whole lot of recoil, that's not going to give me nowhere near as much vertical spread as I would get if I was shooting something like my 7 SAUM, which I didn't have anything loaded up, so that's why I didn't do this video with that. I went ahead and did the video with the 6 Creedmoor here. But if we would have done this with the 7 SAUM, or even anything else that has a significant amount more recoil than that, you would see an even larger amount of vertical stringing in the inconsistent way that I was loading my bipod. So that is why bipod load consistency matters. And that's why when you practice, when you lay down prone and you practice your dry fire practice, that's why doing that and doing it consistently every time, there's so many little things about our fundamentals of our precision rifle shooting, and each one of those things goes together as a full picture to give us the most accuracy that we can possibly get out of our rifle. And even doing one of those things inconsistently, as I've shown many times, or as I show the difference in doing one fundamental properly and then improperly, each one of those things can cause your group size to open up. If you do multiple of those things inconsistently or the wrong way, obviously your group size can open up drastically. Or if you have a rifle that has a significant amount of recoil and you are not loading the bipod consistently, your groups can open up drastically. So just something I figured people may not be aware of. Something that I see people do a lot. Sometimes people will load the bipod very hard and then not load the bipod at all, or load the bipod just barely. And you'll see vertical stringing in their groups, and that could very well be the culprit in their inconsistency in loading the bipod. So I hope this is helpful. I'll see you guys next time. I'm out.